Good afternoon. Welcome to the last session of today and the last public session of the 20th anniversary Bruegel annual meeting. I'm hugely pleased that my colleagues allowed me to kind of get the big room for a topic that I think is very big, and I'm very happy that you all made it here still, which is development of the electricity union. It's a topic that we have invested quite a lot over the past decades in with a lot of work on interconnectors, on market mechanisms, market design, on questions of grid tariffication and so on. And we still believe that sometimes we kind of focus on it in a slightly too technical way and in a maybe too Brussels bubble way, looking into what the marginal improvements could potentially be. And I would like to, I hope that this discussion today we can kind of try to zoom out a bit to the politics of it, of a more significant integration step that in my view would be needed. But I mean, feel free to also disagree with the premise of this. As we are not a kind of a super full panel, I also hope that we can have a real discussion with some force and back here. And as Jeremy did in this morning, I would also like to kind of look 20 years back and then look 20 years ahead to motivate a bit what we are doing. So let's look back 20 years on Europe's electricity system, and you will see one thing that stayed almost constant, that is European electricity demand. Electricity demand in Europe, and also the electricity usage, so which sectors used what type of electricity, did almost not change. We have almost the same way of consuming electricity in industry, households, and as we did in 2005 when Bruegel was created. But what changed massively is the way we produced electricity. 20 years ago, electricity was still dominantly produced by fossil fuels. Now, coal generation has reduced by a factor of 2/3 to 3/4 since then. Renewables have picked up massively, make up now about half of the generation from a relatively minor share in 2005, which shows that the system that some people describe as very, very hard to transform is able to transform at relatively fast speed for the size of the system. Now let's look 20 years ahead. And I can only encourage you to have a look at the website of the JRC, because they have done some reference scenarios for in 2024 that, in my view, kind of give a view of what implementing the European targets would mean for the energy system in 2050 and 2040, and likewise in 2045. And what they have kind of show there in their reference scenario is a doubling of electricity consumption, so hasn't changed for 20 years, now is going to double in the next 20 years. A complete shift in the or complete phase out of the dirty fuels in the system at the same time, and we displace even much more energy through electricity than the electricity that we produce. Let me explain. So if you have electricity in a car, you displace factor 3 to 5 of primary energy. So electrification is going to be the big game. So that's why I think if we have a discussion now about 20 years ahead of the energy sector, it needs to be primarily about electricity, and that's why we are here today. Now the big challenge with this transformation, in my view, is that we did not manage to create yet a functioning European system. If I would argue that, try to paint a very dark picture, I would say that national regulators still tell national transmission system operators not to open the borders too much, that national governments try to tell companies to invest in this type of technology in this location, and that they give very, very strong signals of what the price for different consumer groups in their national market is going to be. It's not as bad as a caricature here, but that is, it's also not completely kind of distanced from the reality. And I would argue in a world where we have double the electricity consumption in Europe, where electricity is the main driver of our economy, where renewables are really a dominant source of electricity, working together closely across borders is crucial for our economic success, for our sovereignty, and our future competitiveness. So therefore, making sure that here we are not trapped in kind of last century national policies, but think about 21st century operation and management of the system is crucial. Now, with that sort of kind of big picture outline, I would like to introduce the first panelist, and the first panelist. Sorry, I take my note. To speak is Anna Störk. Anna is a member of parliament from Austria, and she is the she has been the rapporteur for the Parliament's grid paper, so she has worked quite a lot with electricity sector people over the past months. And as the politician on the panel, I would be essentially most interested in understanding what your take would be. Sense of a political perspective. So do you think that further integration steps are possible? How gradual, if at all, should we go? Where would you see the main bottlenecks? And maybe do you share the overall premise that we need to go further steps at this point in time?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm not entirely sure inviting an MEP is the best way of getting outside the Brussels bubble in our responses, but I'll try my best anyways. First to say, I absolutely do agree on where we need to get to in 20 years, and I also agree that if that is where we want to be in 20 years, or if that is where we expect to be in 20 years, then we need to be acting yesterday, because the transition takes time. I mean, you know, the energy infrastructure is a very physical infrastructure, and that build out simply takes time. If we look at our supply chains, if we look at the political aspects around it, such things as permitting, we just see that all of this takes time. So yes, it's desperately time to act. As I said, it's taken me yesterday, but you know, if we act now, I don't think we're too late yet. But if we look at the bottlenecks, I think it's a multi-layered problem and question. And I want to say that national interests in the European Union, no matter what topic we look at, but also in energy, simply are still very strong. And I think we have to take them seriously to a certain extent. I mean, when we look at the fact, you know, yes, there is a regulatory lack of Europeanness, but there's also a physical lack of Europeanness. When we look at, I mean, you just mentioned the grids, obviously just worked on that quite a lot, so it's quite on my mind, but it's also just very important. If we don't have the physical infrastructure connecting our countries, then we'll never have a European energy union, even if we have the same regulatory framework. So this is of huge importance, and let me use it as an example, right, of the multi-layered problem. I think first, the money problem. That let's first look at countries that might lose out, right? I mean, we have to accept and admit that for countries like Sweden, for example, interconnecting with Germany might lead to higher prices for Sweden, at least for now. So that is a real concern from Swedish consumers and from the Swedish government, therefore. So they don't push for it. Okay, so we have to find a way to compensate them, or at least find a way to make sure that they're not harmed in the process. You have other countries like my own. I come from Austria, so we are a transit country. We're used to that from, you know, mobility, you know, roads, but it's the same for energy and electricity in particular. So if we invest in our interconnectors, in our cross-border infrastructure, then we're not the ones benefiting from it. In fact, we are the ones paying for it. But sometimes this is actually not harmful, but not necessarily helpful for our national grid system. So again, we see countries that have no interest in it, no national interest. So here, yes, we have cross-border cost allocation, we have inter-TSO compensations already, mechanisms to support those countries, but they're just not there in the amount that we need. So those are very real worries that people have, but there's also political worries, you know? I mean, we have examples or have had examples in the past where countries were weary to connect to other countries because that might have negative political implications, you know, because then the people could say, oh, you're importing this and that sort of energy. Okay, let's call it by its name. You're importing nuclear energy and we don't want that. So you also have a political level that we need to address. And there, I think, having European pressure might even help nation states overcome that political worry. But I want to name one last kind of bottleneck or problem, because I don't want to go on too long, that I think we need to be very clear about. And that is the fact that we still, to this day, have a very, very strong fossil fuel lobby. And we cannot ignore that, because when we see, even now, you know, we see ever more countries having fiscal problems, having huge debts. So what do we see happening? We see a scale back in subsidies for renewables, a scale back in subsidies for consumers, etc. But when we look at the fossil fuel subsidies, those aren't touched in the same way. And we need to be very realistic about why that is. And a huge part is still the fact that fossil fuel companies are very, very powerful. And we, as politicians, I think have to be very clear in our goals and in that vision for in 20 years, because if we're not clear and set in that road to electrification, to the energy transition, then it won't happen.
Very, very clear. One question back on the last point. My understanding is that, I mean, we're talking about electricity sector integration and its policies that are very often kind of done by different branches of the ministry than what the fossil sector is coming from. Would you observe that directly or indirectly they're using electricity-related bottlenecks and complications is a part of kind of delaying the transition?
I mean, I'm sure a lot of people in this room, you all seem to be interested in energy questions, so I'm sure you've all followed what is happening in Germany at the moment. I think that's also speaks to your point. Absolutely. I mean, I think in a way we are seeing somewhat of a hen and egg problem with the energy transition right now. What I mean by that is we've been quite good at the rollout of renewables. So good, in fact, that we haven't been at the same time as good at rolling out grid infrastructure, modernizing that grid, digitalizing that grid, finding flexible solutions, rolling out storage, and the electrification. I mean, you just mentioned it, hasn't changed, demand hasn't changed, even though we expected it to change over the last few years already. So we saw the renewables. We now have negative prices for many, many hours a year. So investments in renewables are becoming less interesting. And this is giving this, I'm going to say, imbalance, is giving politicians that might not have that huge of an interest in the energy transition a very good reason to say, oh, maybe we should slow down a bit with the energy transition and wait for the other sectors to catch up. But I fear that that can be a bit of a fig leaf, you know, to cover the fact that actually they're not that interested in the energy transition. But even when you talk to companies who are interested in electrifying, and that's what I mean by a bit of a hen and egg problem, the problem is that the electricity is just too expensive at the moment, and the infrastructure, it's true, isn't there that they need. So they don't want to invest in electrifying because they don't see that they will have that kind of electricity available to the price that they need. But we need them to electrify because then that will help us get the costs down. And that's what I mean by the hen and egg problem. And that's why I think right now politics has to be very strong. We have to make very decisive decisions in order to bridge that moment that we're in, because I think once we get it rolling, I think there will be a positive, dynamic.
Okay, good. And I think we can come later to the question to which degree kind of that's role of markets and state on the also on the European level to get that integration and that complementary investment towards renewables right. Now, I would like to pass the floor to Elena Giannakopoulou. She is Chief Strategy Officer at PPC, the Greek power company, so not a transit country for energy, but an important European Union member state. Engineer by background, and I would be interested a bit. I mean, a lot of the discussion on kind of pushing the internal European market is on Central Western Europe, pentalateral focus. If we think about that here, we often think about Franco-German alignment. What's the perspective from a member state that is not in Central Western Europe on that, and what should we take from there?
Good, thank you. I'm very glad to be here and have this discussion. It sounds very technical, you know, the integration, we were talking about that. But in reality, it comes down to the bills, to the price of electricity. So there is nothing more relevant than this discussion. So for those that you don't know, PPC, we are the biggest utility in Southeast Europe. We have operations in 7 countries. We have operations from generation to distribution to retail. The reason I'm saying that is because we can tell from first hand what's the impact of European integration across the chain of the electricity sector. When we're talking about integration, I think Anna mentioned it, there are 2 things at the heart of it, right? One is the competitiveness, how you can have cheap electricity flowing around, and the other is security. I think last year Bruegel wrote about our power that lies in our unity, and we also saw that in 2022. So coming from Southeast Europe, which is the periphery of Europe, I can tell you that, you know, it took us a while as we started with the integration much later than the Central Europe, but we have already been benefited. So there is no cheapest way today to produce 1 megawatt hour of electricity from solar and wind. And this is on an unsubsidized basis, right? And what I can tell is that when Greece, for example, joined the EU-wide day-ahead market, what we saw a price reduction at the wholesale market of 20 euros per megawatt hour. For a country that was around 80, this is a very big number. This is a huge number. In 2021, when Romania and Bulgaria joined, again, the EU-wide market, they reduced their price discrepancy from 20 euros per megawatt hour. There are a lot of 20s, so, you know, if you have to give something as 20, to 5 to 10 euros per megawatt hour. This is a huge price convergence. And, you know, in Southeast Europe, affordability is a thing. Like how much you pay on your bill matters proportionally more than, you know, in Central Europe. So seeing this change, step change in the wholesale, which it passes to the retail, not exactly at the same, you know, price differential because there are other things, it matters a lot, and it helps competitiveness, and it helps the, you know, the power of our consumers. So I can tell you that while it took us longer, we could see the difference. Wearing now my developer's hat from PPC, integrating the market, it means that you have a much bigger market. You know, you are not limited by national borders when you are considering investments. And, you know, when you are talking about clean energy, you are not wasting, because when you start curtailing electricity because you don't have where to send it, in reality, you are wasting electricity. And if we agree that it's cost competitive, you are wasting cost competitive electricity. And, you know, of course, at the end, there is the security of supply discussion. We have very windy north in Europe, same goes in Southeast Europe. You have sunny south, so, you know, this complementarity has to offer a lot to all of us when we are thinking about how much we are consuming fossil fuels, why we are consuming, and when we are consuming. So we have been benefited overall the last, you know, 4 years. It's tangible. It's not a theoretical exercise. We have seen that. Do we have more way to go? Yes, we do. But you asked about benefits, so, you know, I will stop to the good side of things right now.
I mean, it's a really great testament to the power of what the internal market could achieve in terms of, as you said, liquidity, security, and bringing down cost. But I mean, the internal market has been created a long time ago. Now we had very high prices a few years back, and my understanding was that integration in the region was not always very, very good. Was there anything that kind of is unlocking this potential for cross-border trade now more? Do you think it will go ahead, or is Brussels helpful in this, or is that essentially an issue to be discussed in the region between the heads of state and government?
So for those of you that haven't heard, last summer was a very difficult one in Southeast Europe. There was an energy crisis in a period that we didn't traditionally have this type of issues. And when we started looking at it, it was on the one hand a perfect storm in the sense that there was very low hydro in the region because of droughts, but this is not an extreme anymore. It's really the impact of climate change. We had Ukraine and Moldova pulling electricity through Romania from the European grid. And we had a very hot summer, again, not really an extreme, something that now happens every year, it's a business as usual. And then what we realized is that transmission lines, especially between Central Europe and Southeast Europe, were not fully utilized. On the one hand, there are a bunch of planning issues that we need to discuss when we plan, maintenance, when we put our assets down. But at the same time, we really, while we need more cross-border interconnections, more grid investments, national, across countries, we really need to make sure that we are fully utilizing what we have now, because we saw a crisis with prices really like day-ahead prices reaching 300 and 350 euros on almost a daily basis, while at the same time we could see transmission lines not fully utilized. And that's definitely not in line with the European market integration. The discussions now, of course, after an incident, we are always wiser and we are always willing to find solutions. The Energy Task Force has helped a lot. This summer things were much, much better. So yes, there is still way to go, as there is still fragmentation that affects the periphery.
Okay. Yeah, my understanding was that last year we then got letters from the Greek Prime Minister to the Council, and that this was really kind of brought up to high political attention, and that some of the also potentially more technical constraints that in the end were not so technical were able to resolve. And I mean, to me it shows a bit that these questions are not necessarily only to be solved within technical circles, but might require also a higher level political attention to get trusted system integration. I would like, last but not least, give the floor to Monika. Monika Morawiecka is a senior advisor at Regulatory Assistance Project. Regulatory Assistance Project is one of the kind of most active in Europe and beyond electricity regulation advisories or energy regulation advisories with a very deep technical expertise and market expertise. And Monika herself has a long history in the energy sector, and we also have co-authored a couple of pieces together, and I always appreciated a lot your take on the kind of zooming out a bit and providing a bit of an institutional political perspective. So it would be interesting to hear from what you would think is maybe the institutional targets that we could strive for, where we are today. What are the gaps, if you might.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. And also, I feel like I should be actually summarizing because all has been said already, almost. But yeah, so maybe let me take a step back as well, like in time, like you did. Maybe not 20 years, but I'm just going to look 11 years back, because the concept of energy union was first proposed by a Polish Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, in 2014. This was back then about joint gas supplies and joint gas purchases. That was never implemented. Had we implemented that back then, we maybe wouldn't have the crisis in 2022, or not as deep of a crisis. So this is just to tell you how important this cooperation and integration and working together is for European energy sector as a whole. And I think another thing just to remember, how during the energy crisis of 2022, France turned from the biggest exporter of electricity to the biggest importer of electricity in Europe. And this was, and that they could do it, they could supply themselves, this was because we have this infrastructure. So we really have to first appreciate what we already have, and I think we have a lot. Because looking at energy prices, electricity prices, we are worried, rightly so, for many reasons, for the vulnerable customers, for the energy-intensive industries, for electrification. We are worried about the prices. And there is a couple of things that we do not have in Europe, and we will not have probably. We don't have cheap domestic gas supplies that are setting our prices on the wholesale market. We don't have that. We don't have low labor costs. We don't have common fiscal rules. We don't have many things. What we do have is this really great infrastructure, the biggest interconnected energy system in the world, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think it is the biggest. So we do have that, and let's really appreciate that, because it helps us achieve a lot of the things, and you talked about that, Elena. The benefits of the integration are manifold, and they're really big, like lack of waste, less fossil fuel imports, more flexibility in the system. You can ask any European TSO whether they're happy to have interconnectors. They will bicker for many reasons, that there's not this, not that, cost sharing, blah, 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 but they are so happy to have this flexibility in their system. They are, really. So we really have that. And now looking to the future, we face two kinds of problems. First, I think, is we have this dichotomy a bit. So on one hand, we need to be looking very much local. So because all of the, most of the new infrastructure is being built at the very local level, at the distribution level. Most of the renewables, storage, new demands, these are local things. So you have also a very big requirement for local balancing, right? So you really have to look local. On the other hand, you really need to look cross-border, so on this high level. And this is posing a tension sometimes, because people have different priorities. So they see, okay, now let's work on local balancing of on microgrids, and not necessarily on cross-border projects. And this is a wrong sort of trade-off. It's not either or, it's both we have to do. So that's one group. The other group is more important, and Anna, you talked about it. So this is the sort of political willingness to do something and to do more together, because we have these distributional impacts, not only between member states, but also within member states. We have the cost-sharing problems. We have all of those problems. And now the way forward is probably, or surely, the way forward is first and foremost having really joint, strong political will. And this is easier said than done, of course. How do we do that? Well, I guess another big kind of concept is we have to build trust, obviously. Without trust, we will not have this political will across Europe. How do we build trust then? There are a few ingredients probably, and the first one would be just trying to achieve broad legitimacy across all of the major stakeholders. And I'm talking really broadly, not just the infrastructure providers, not just generators. Society as a whole, broadly, all the major stakeholders have to be on board with this route. Now, how do we do that? We need transparency, first and foremost. And what we also need is fairness and solidarity. So people have to understand that what we are doing will be fair. And this is back to your point about cost sharing and all that distributional effects. And this all has to be obviously underpinned, to be trustworthy, it has to be underpinned by clear rules, enforceable rules, and strong institutions. And here, maybe I won't go into the details because we'll go too technical, but maybe, independent system operation around Europe is something to be worked on in the future, because we really need strong institutions to build this trust and to build on that trust this political commitment and political agreement to do more together, because this will bring obvious benefits.
Thanks, Monica. Let me try to get out from these high-level criteria to some kind of boiling it down to something more concrete. Would you have an idea of what needs to stay national? So can we define what is the national remit that we must kind of maintain and can maintain with limited cost, and what are the things where you think that steps towards more European solutions are feasible, or where maybe more coordination is possible or advisable? You mentioned ISO, or independent system operation, whether it's an ISO, you tell me, but please.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm a liberal economist by heart and by training, so I would say we don't need a lot of national things at all. We do benefit from stronger integration across Europe, but I guess the most important things would be the sort of to harmonize at least a bit the planning principles and planning processes around Europe, because we try to do that through various processes like 10-year network development plans and the adequacy assessment, but it's still lacking. It's still not there yet. It's still really just taking the 27 and piecing them all together and not really trying to optimize across Europe. So. And then these are very difficult also political choices that could be made, because if you look at Europe as a whole and you look at just extracting the most sort of social value for Europe as a whole, then you would come to the conclusion that it's not maybe useful to have, wind power being developed everywhere. It's not maybe useful to have solar power developed everywhere. It's better to just concentrate some of these in regions with better resources. It's also maybe not that beneficent to have, the energy intensive industry everywhere. Maybe let's agree to shift a bit and build this where there are cheap resources. So. But again, this is something that will take time, and we're probably looking 20 years ahead, if not more, to achieve that.
Anna, can I maybe kind of follow up on that and get some understanding whether you believe that momentum for such a more substantial integration step could come from the Commission or the Parliament, or would need to come from a coalition of member states? What is your sense?
It's a very good question. So I think a little bit of all of the above. We do get very good signals from the Commission that at least Commissioner Jorgensen, I don't know about the whole college, but at least Commissioner Jorgensen actually does have a huge interest in pushing for further integration and for maybe pushing almost a bit too far. I think quite strategically as well. But, I think when we first heard that we'd get a Danish energy minister, I think that was a happy day for all of us, because when we look at the fact that, Denmark has not just done very well in their energy transition, but is the only country who has by now implemented RED 3. It's a good sign that we have the former energy minister now, and I think he will be pushing for it. And I'm looking forward to the grid package, because I think a lot of aspects that we've just talked about, especially when it comes to the question of planning, will be there, and we've heard so in bilateral meetings or multilateral meetings with him. I think the European Parliament, we saw in our own negotiations for this grid initiative report by the Parliament, that there is definitely, maybe not, you never know about the whole groups, but in general, a broad majority in this House that does want to have further integration, that does want to push for more. And I think in a way, as much as this sounds quite cynical, we started our process for this initiative report in January, and we finished in June. And as you may all recall, in that time period, something quite substantial happened in the energy system, and that was a blackout in the Iberian Peninsula and parts of France. And really what we saw was a shift in mindset from a lot of politicians, a lot of more extreme calls for integration and a lot more pressure that we want to put on member states. And I think, what's nice about being a European politician working in energy, it's actually one field where you meet national stakeholders and they actually like what the European Union is doing. And they actually say, the best things in the energy sector that have come along over the last few years always came from the European Union. So we actually have quite strong stakeholders who actually will push, I think, nationally as well to have that strength. But it will take a strong commission, it will take a strong parliament, I think, to particularly in the planning process, as you said, and I'm very glad that you spoke about it, Monica, because it's so crucial that we have a bit more of a European oversight to make sure that the planning of the European energy infrastructure is just done on a more holistic European way. So a little bit of all of the above.
Thank you. Then switch from politics to business. And this morning, and excuse the slight provocation, Mario Monti said on displays here that companies very often go to their capitals to protect their markets against their European competitors, and then they go to Brussels and complain about that the market is not working. Now, your CEO is now one of the vice presidents at Eurelectric, if I understand. Is the European energy industry pushing for integration? Is it complicated? Is there some momentum to be expected from there?
If we treat each system on its own, it has a very short life. Even from a business perspective, it's very different to look at a country, at a system, even if it's a big one. It has its limitations, and it's very different to look at opportunities, across Europe or in certain areas. That's one thing. The other thing is that the great majority of utilities, they operate in more than one country. They are not limited in one country. So having to deal with very fragmented market in reality, so very different regulations, very different planning processes, very different directions, it's confusing. It doesn't help us, deliver the much needed projects for the country, but also that make economic sense. As I said, in Europe, renewable energy makes a lot of sense from a business perspective. I will call Monica for her previous hat in renewable energy development. So we want a market that has a common framework. Even now, we have gone through this wave of renewable energy development, and we are talking about adequacy and flexibility. I couldn't agree more with your point that instead of designing one system for 27 countries, we patch 27 national systems. This is suboptimal. And as utilities, we serve the consumer at the end of the day. So a price that cannot be afforded, it's a disaster. It doesn't make sense for nobody, like from a, like a policymaker's perspective, to regulator's perspective, to business perspective. And that's why, from a business perspective as well, stable regulation that is evolving dynamically, but also investment in infrastructure and a shared framework across Europe would make a lot of sense for us as well.
I won't ask you now whether within Euroelectric companies that are dominantly national and companies that are active in many markets have the same position. My personal experience is that their position is often very different, and it's maybe also something to think about if we want to think about more integration, to which degree we can make the company environment more European on that end. I think I would now like to open the floor to you for questions. You can put them on Slido, but also here in the room. I see one first question, two questions here, one from Connell and one from Claude. Please introduce yourself.
Thanks. Yeah, Connell Hussaf, Airgrid, Irish TSO. So a few of the panelists mentioned the sort of need for more integrated planning. And sort of EU level, top down, presumably, and the benefits that would bring. Concretely, what would that look like? Who should do it? You know, what functions would they have to enforce the outcomes of this planning? Because you can still plan for sort of better infrastructure, but if there's political opposition to it, will it be delivered? How can that political opposition be overcome?
Thank you. I'm Claude Thomas, former Minister of Energy from Luxembourg, and I was also in the European Parliament. When this Southeast European crisis emerged 2 years ago, I was amazed. I saw letters from the Greek Prime Minister, Romanian Prime Minister, blaming almost Europe. But when I spoke to experts, they said to me, none of these countries had implemented the market design directive and the flexibilities which was foreseen, and you rightly mentioned that there was a suboptimal use of existing power lines. So with a distance of 2 years, this Southeast European so-called crisis wasn't, I think the real reason for this crisis was the non-implementation of EU law in the very Southeast European countries. And in addition to that, for me the next step is really the integration of Southeast Europe with Ukraine and Moldavia. And Europe has one success story on grids, which is BMIP, which was a 10, 12, 15-year effort to desynchronize the 3 Baltic states. And that was coordinated from Brussels, with a lot of opposition in Poland. so we had to overcome a lot of basically obstacles. So for me, the next big step would be a UAMIP, where basically Europe would help the grid integration, and we set the market integration of whole Southeast Europe with Moldavia and Ukraine. So maybe it's a question to the 3 of you.
Yeah, Anna, you can take the question from Connell on what a more independent system operation should or could end.
I'll try to keep it short, which also means I might leave out some of the details. But so I'll start by saying if we want to have a more integrated planning process, that starts with the modelling, and we have options also on the European level. We have systems that can support us in that modelling process. At the moment, we are seeing also that being a bit too fragmented. We see a lack of transparency when it comes to what scenarios are being used for the planning on national level. We see a lack of transparency when it comes to how the models that are being used, how the modelling actually works. So we have European modelling systems. We just need to use them. So I think that is one that I think the models and therefore also the scenarios should be provided on a European level. And I wouldn't say it's a top-down per se. I don't think that, at least for me, is not the goal, because Monica, I mean, you said it, it's also a very local issue, right? So first of all, I would never call for distribution systems to be planned on a European level. I think it has to be both. Continue a top-down, a bottom-up approach, because you have the knowledge, you have the interest from the local government or the local DSOs. You have the knowledge from the TSOs, so you need that. But there has to be European oversight, in my opinion. And when you ask who can do that, I think there's several options, and we have to look at what is the most palatable option. I mean, we have ACER that currently can't do that. I mean, they can say we're not happy with the TYNDP as it stands, but it's like they could also say that to a wall. There's nothing happens when they say that. So either you could give more powers to them, or you could give more power to part of the Commission. There are some people calling for a European Energy Agency. So I think the options are various. And so I think the question of who should do it isn't going to be the one that would stop that idea or that process. But I think it's highly important that we have that. And you're right. I mean, then the question of implementation remains, and it's difficult. We see right now also we have projects that might even become are PCI projects. So they went through the TYNDP process. They were decided to be a project of common interest, but they don't have the support from the nation states to actually be implemented, and they run into huge problems there. So yes, that is an issue, but there again, I think that's where all the other mechanisms we need to work on come in.
If I can complement a bit, maybe with my thoughts here, I think currently it's impossible to achieve that, and that's very clear for the reasons that Anna mentioned. And I have two acronyms for you now. It's getting technical again. I mentioned one acronym already, ISO, Independent System Operator. This is what UK is now doing with the NISO. So it's a system operator or a system planner as well that does not own networks. And that is very important. And that's the only one that I know of, at least in Europe, that does that. And that's independency from interests, from like embedded interests in developing networks in a specific geography, gives this planning kind of independence and planning, the transparency needed. So that's one acronym here. It would be great to have an ISO in Europe. It's still a distant future. The second acronym I would have here is LMP, Locational Marginal Pricing, because this actually connects the two, connects the local with the transmission level and optimizes the two. And it's also very far away, and it's been discounted now in the UK. We always look towards UK to have the best ideas, and they do, and they discuss them for years, and then they decide not to do them. It's so frustrating.
Maybe
I will take the question for Southeast Europe. Okay. It was a couple of years ago, actually, and I'm not sure what you mean when you said that the European law was not implemented, because at the time, Greece has adopted the target model. Same goes for Romania and, of course, Bulgaria. By end of 2021, the three countries participated in the EU-wide single market, day-ahead market. They were coupled with each other, and they were also coupled with Italy. Okay. So what we saw at the time, looking at the data from the ENSOE, is at times with very high demand, and when the system was very stretched, and everything in terms of assets, some underinvested assets in the region, but all the assets were operating as they should be. The interconnection between Central and Southeast Europe was down to zero. So you had cross-border lines that at high demand, when their signals should be, operate, keep transferring electricity from one country to the other, they didn't operate. On the one hand, and this was from, ENSOE data, it's not something that we crunched or anyone crunched, it was publicly available data. So I understand that there were discussions at, prime minister's levels, discussions at minister levels. This might have been because of poor planning, I would say, or it might have been something that has to do with the algorithm that solves the market. In any case, when you have very high demand, all your assets are operating, and transmission lines don't transfer any electricity, it was zero, there is a red flag there that had to be raised. This year, things worked much better. I understand that everyone was more mindful of how we utilize the transmission lines. So, as I said, a lot of times it comes down to planning, to understand how our systems have evolved, but also what are the needs. And yes, I hear you, Southeast Europe, as I said from the beginning, the periphery is not where Central Europe is, so definitely we have way to go. We need to spend a lot of money in the region to invest. All these countries have gone through various types of crises, and not a lot of money have been spent of generation, but also grids. It's a process in the making, but nevertheless, we need to make sure, in addition to keep investing in the European infrastructure, that we fully utilize what we currently have on the ground.
Could I take two more questions? This one from Nico and one there.
Benedikt Herges with Siemens Energy. We are a grid manufacturer. One of the biggest bottlenecks we face is the complexity of grid tenders. When operators tender grid equipment, we get 23,000 pages on average. And this is because everything is tailor-made to the littlest detail. This means our engineering team is busy for 6 months, cannot answer to more projects. It means we can produce only item by item, and we can ask our supply chain only to give us one item because we don't know what the next one looks like. So we are building our grid on Bugattis and not on Volkswagen. Bugattis where even the color of the stitches is tailor-made, while what we need is a Volkswagen that runs reliably and does the job. So it needs to be functional. And we are not there. And so my question is, how can we get from a Bugatti to a Volkswagen? Why should the consumer pay via the network tariffs Bugattis when he could pay Volkswagens? And can we not use the tripartite agreements to get at least a voluntary commitment between governments, TSOs and manufacturers to say, let's simplify the grid tenders so that we can finally move on? Thank you.
May I ask an understanding question back on the the grid regulations? I didn't get the word fully.
The tenders.
Tenders.
So the network, yeah, okay.
And that is national TSOs, specific rules, or this is some, where does it come from? Because I have, to be frank, I have not heard of that.
It's good engineers in love with their technology. So it's tailor-made requests. Is
from the individual
from the
TSOs.
So there's no legislation in the way, but it's a voluntary choice to say, I want on an offshore platform the door on the left side, not on the right side. I want it in blue, not in red. I have long list, this item, I want it only from this manufacturer and this item only from this and this one, etc. So it's
okay.
a choice.
And they can do that because they pass on the high cost that you then charge to the final consumer and
it's paid for by society, yeah. We could save 10% costs and could be 25% faster.
Okay. Nico.
Nicholas Kormeyer for Euractiv. I just wanted to pick up on something you said earlier, Monica, with this, I don't know, entire stakeholder buy-in. So does that mean that there needs to be sort of a new era of energy policy politicization? Is that ultimately what you're calling for? And whether that's something that is even feasible? Was the current state of Europe only possible because it was an elite-driven process without any politicization? I mean, we see what happens when it does get politicized. Just look to Norway and the likely cutting of cables to Europe, right? And since you started your intervention with it, maybe could you explain the Polish obsession with joint purchasing? Seems more hassle than it is worth.
Anna, do you have any comment on the Siemens question? Because I have not heard of this.
I mean, I think it would actually be very interesting to hear from you, because it's one of those things where you technically wouldn't need politics, right? I mean, TSOs could just get together and decide that on their own. Since it's not happening, I understand that there is a call to politics. In the Parliament report, you'll find something catering to that. Whether, and I know the industry would prefer technical tenders. I know that others would prefer standardization, but no matter what it is, I do believe that we could do something about it. And I think it's one of those moments where, I know at the moment everyone calls for standard, deregulation, but it's actually one example where regulation can actually lead to simplification. So we're definitely working on that, and I hope that it will be part of the grid package as well.
I can add to that, because this is really talking about public procurement laws around Europe mostly, and that's a regulatory failure that we have. And I've experienced that in my life too. So, but it was a very good point to point out that we face this other obstacle for further integration, which is the cost. Which is why some projects recently failed to be built, like the Polish-Lithuanian interconnector was failed to be built because of the cost. And yes, I heard what you actually described as being too prescriptive in the tender. I don't know that, but that may be true, and it's probably due to the national implementation of public procurement rules being set up on the European level. And then that's my take. But it is a very important problem, and I agree with that, because standardization, and now why we want to have joint purchases. This is perhaps why, because when you standardize, you get it cheaper, and this is about it. This is about standardization. Now, politicization. Well, yeah, I don't think we can escape that fully. I think what we have to be better at is communication, and really it's really about politicians communicating well and honestly. It's also about the media, who really do a bad job many times, and it's very frustrating to see. But I think if we don't have this wide buy-in by stakeholders, we will not get very far, because it's because of this buy-in that we had about climate change in general, that the public thinks it is an issue and we have to do something about it, that we are able to be doing these things, and we're able to be having these conferences as well. Yeah.
Thank you. I think it's time to wrap up, and I promised to myself that I'll try to end up on an optimistic and positive note. Because some of the things we heard today were rather downbeat. But I think on this energy union, electricity union, it seems that all the tools are in our hand. The resources are here. We have the wind and the sun, and if you like, the engineers to build nuclear plants and transmission lines and power plants and what have you. All that we have here. It's on us to get this thing together and moving right. I believe we will eventually get there. So it's, to me, the case is so straightforward that we need a European integrated system that is so much more efficient and so much more structurally sustainable in the long term that I would think that we eventually will get there. So the only thing is, when will we get there? And I hope we can all move together as fast as possible, because losing time would just be losing cost. So thanks a lot for spending the day with us, and for the attention, and hope to see you at the next MEM, or hopefully even earlier.